Hey everybody, I just like to say that every time. Chapter 17, Part 2, I'm on the top of 229. Mr. Yule is about to take the stand. We did some background on the Yule place and the black folks that lived nearby and saw how much better the house of the black folks was than the Yule's house. All the little man in the witness stand had that made him any better than his nearest neighbors was that if he scrubbed with lye soap in very hot water, his skin was white. That's an interesting line there. So the only thing that Yule has going for him is that he's white. Like he's gross and no one respects him and he's like lives terribly and no one likes him or any of them. But because he's white, there's some power in that. Okay, here we go. Mr. Robert Ewell, asked Mr. Gilmer. That's my name, Captain, said the witness. Mr. Gilmer's back stiffened a little, and I felt sorry for him. Perhaps I'd better explain something now. I've heard that lawyers' children, on seeing their parents in court in the heat of the argument, get the wrong idea. They think the opposing counsel to be personal enemies of their parents. They suffer agonies and are surprised to see them often go out arm in arm with their tormentors during the first recess. This was not true of Jem and me. We acquired no traumas from watching our father win or lose. I'm sorry that I can't provide any drama in that respect. If I did, it would not be true. We could tell, however, when debate became more acrimonious, or like bad, than professional, but this was more from watching lawyers other than our father. I never heard Atticus raise his voice in my life, except to a deaf witness. Mr. Gilmer was doing his job as Atticus was doing his. Besides, Mr. Yule was Mr. Gilmer's witness, and he had no business being rude to him of all people. Are you the father of Mayella Yule? Was the next question. Well, if I ain't, can't do nothing about it now. Her ma's dead. Dead, was the answer. So, just notice this. The first question is his name. The second question is, are you the father of Mayella Yule? Now, the answer to this is yes. Simple. Are you the father of Mayella Yule? Yes. And he's like, well, if I'm not, can't do anything about it now. So he's basically like, well, if I'm not her father and her mother slept around, her mother's dead, no well. Totally inappropriate. Ugh. God, I hate him. Judge Taylor stirred. He turned slowly in his swivel chair and looked benignly at the witness. Are you the father of Mayella Yule? He asked, in a way that made the laughter below us stop suddenly. Yes, sir, said Mr. Yule meekly. Judge Taylor went on in tones of goodwill. This is the first time you have ever been in court? I don't recall ever seeing you here. At the witness's affirmative nod, he continued, well, let's get something straight. There will be no more audibly obscene speculations on any subject from anybody in this courtroom as long as I am sitting here. Do you understand? Mr. Yule nodded, but I don't think he did. Judge Taylor sighed and said, all right, Mr. Gilmer. Sorry. Oh, it's past my bedtime. Thank you, sir. Mr. Yule, would you tell us in your own words what happened on the evening of November 21st, please? Jem grinned and pushed his hair back. Jem's paying attention. Just in your own words was Mr. Gilmer's trademark. We often wondered who else's words Mr. Gilmer was afraid the witness might employ. Well, the night of November 21, I was coming in from the woods with a load of kindling, and just as I got to the fence, I heard Mayella screaming like a stuck hog inside the house. Here, Judge Taylor glanced sharply at the witness and must have decided his speculations devoid of evil intent, for he subsided sleepily. What time was it, Mr. Yule? Just before sundown. Well, I was saying Mayella was screaming fit to beat Jesus. Another glance from the bench silenced Mr. Yule. Yes, she was screaming, said Mr. Gilmer. Mr. Yule looked confusedly at the judge. Well, Mayella was raising this holy racket, so I dropped my load and run as fast as I could. But I run into the fence. But when I got distangled, I run it through the window, and I seen... Mr. Yule's face grew scarlet red. He stood up and pointed a finger at Tom Robinson. I seen that black nigger yonder rutting on my Mayella. So serene was Judge Taylor's court that he had few occasions to use his gavel, but he hammered fully 5 minutes. Atticus was on his feet at the bench saying something to him. Mr. Hectate, as the first officer of the county, stood in the middle of the aisle, quelling the panicked courtroom. Behind us, there was angry, muffled groans from the colored people. Reverend Sykes leaned across Dill and me, pulling at Jem's elbow. Mr. Jem, he said, you better take Miss Jean Louise home. Mr. Jem, you hear me? Jem turned his head. Scout, go home. Dill and you, Scout, go home. You got to make me first, I said, remembering Atticus's blessed dictum. Jem scowled furiously at me. Then he said to Reverend Sykes, I think it's okay, Reverend. She doesn't understand it. I was mortally offended. I most certainly do. I can understand everything you can. That's funny. Ah, hush. She doesn't understand it, Reverend. She ain't 9 yet. Reverend Sykes' Reverend Sykes' black eyes were anxious. Mr. Finch, know y'all are here? This ain't fit for Miss Jean Louise, or you boys either. It's in a pro-pro. Can't listen to this. I knew Jem would win because I knew nothing could make him leave now. Dill and I were safe for a while. Atticus could see us from where he was, if he looked. As Judge Taylor banged his gavel, Mr. Ewell was sitting snugly in the witness chair, surveying his handiwork. With one phrase, with one phrase, he had turned happy picnicking into sulky, tense, murmuring crowd, being slowly hypnotized by the gavel taps, lessening in intensity, until the only sound in the courtroom was the dim pink, pink, pink. The judge might have been rapping the bench with a pencil. In possession of his court once more, Judge Taylor leaned back in his chair. He looked suddenly weary and tired. His age was showing, and I thought about what Atticus had said. He and Mrs. Taylor didn't kiss very much. He must have been nearly 70. There has been a request, Judge Taylor said, that this courtroom be cleared of spectators, or at least of women and children, a request that will be denied for the time being. People generally see what they look for and hear what they listen for. They have the right to subject their children to it. But I can assure you one thing, you will receive what you see and hear in silence, or you will leave this courtroom. But you won't leave it until a whole boiling of you come before me on contempt charges. Mr. Ewell, you will keep your testimony within the confines of Christian English usage, if that is possible. Proceed, Mr. Gilmer. So he just got a little slap on the wrist there. Hold on, I need a little water. My eyes are tired, can you see? Mr. Ewell reminded me of a deaf mute. Oh, man, I did not. Okay, so a little pause here. That's really interesting. So one time, Mitzi and I, we were looking at up in Ashland, Oregon, they have a ton of Shakespeare plays. They do a lot of plays there, like a ton. And one evening, I was looking on the Ashland, Oregon thing, and I was like, oh, I heard Mockingbird's playing up there. So we looked, thinking maybe we could go in the summer, and Mockingbird was playing, but the last weekend was that weekend. So this was Thursday. It was either Wednesday or Thursday. And so I was like, hey, Mitzi, you want to go? And so we like spontaneously wrote subplans, took the Friday off, drove up to Oregon to watch To Kill a Mockingbird, the play. And what was really interesting was Mr. Ewell was played by a deaf actor. I had never seen that before, ever. I had never seen a deaf actor play in a hearing role. And so he would sign, and someone would like interpret it for him. It was different. It wasn't bad. It was just I had never seen it before, and it's really interesting. But I wonder if they got the idea from this line. Mr. Ewell reminded me of a deaf mute. I was sure he had never heard the words Judge Taylor directed at him. His mouth struggled silently with them, but their import registered on his face. He also can't read and doesn't understand words, big words. Smugness faded from it, replaced by a dogged earnestness that fooled Judge Taylor not at all. As long as Mr. Ewell was on the stand, the judge kept his eyes on him, as if daring him to make a false move. Mr. Gilmer and Atticus exchanged glances. Atticus was sitting down again. His fist rested on his cheek, and we could not see his face. Mr. Gilmer looked rather desperate. A question from Judge Taylor made him relax. Mr. Ewell, did you see the defendant having sexual intercourse with your daughter? Yes, I did. The spectators were quiet, but the defendant said something. Atticus whispered to him, and Tom Robinson was silent. You say you were at the window? Asked Mr. Gilmer. Yes, sir. How far is it from the ground? About 3 foot. Did you have a clear view of the room? Yes, sir. How did the room look? Well, it was all slung about like there was a fight. What did you do when you saw the defendant? Well, I ran around the house to get in, but he ran out the front door just ahead of me. I saw who he was, all right. I was too distracted about Mayella to run after him. So I run in the house, and she was lying on the floor squalling. What did you do? Then what did you do? Why, I run for Heck Tate quick as I could. I knew who it was, all right. Lived down yonder in that nigger nest. Passed that house every day. Judge, I asked this county for 15 years to clean out that nest down yonder. They're dangerous to live around. Besides, it's devaluing my property. It's devaluing his sorry. It's devaluing his crappy property? Thank you, Mr. Ewell, said Mr. Gilmer hurriedly. The witness made a hasty descent from the stand and ran smack into Atticus, who had risen to question him. Judge Taylor permitted the court to laugh. Just a minute, sir. Sir, said Atticus genially, could I ask you a question or two? Mr. Ewell backed up into the witness chair, settled himself, and regarded Atticus with a haughty suspicion, an expression common to Macomb County witnesses when confronted by opposing counsel. Mr. Ewell, Atticus began, folks were doing a lot of running that night. Let's see, you say you ran into the house, you ran to the window, you ran inside, you ran to Mayella, you ran for Mr. Tate. Did you, during all of this running, run for a doctor? Wasn't no need to. I seen what happened, he said. But there's one thing I don't understand, said Atticus. Weren't you concerned with Mayella's condition? I most positively was, said Mr. Ewell. I seen who done it. No, I mean her physical condition. Did you not think that the nature of her injuries warranted immediate medical attention? What? Didn't you think she should have had a doctor immediately? The witness said he never thought of it. He had never called a doctor to any of his in all his life. And if he had, it'd cost him $5. That all? He asked. Not quite, said Atticus casually. Mr. Ewell, you heard the sheriff's testimony, didn't you? How's that? You were in the courtroom when Mr. Heck Tate was on the stand, weren't you? You heard everything he said, didn't you? Said Atticus. Mr. Ewell considered the matter carefully and seemed to decide that the question was safe. Yes, he said. Do you agree with the description of Mayella's injuries? How's that? He doesn't understand these words. Atticus looked around at Mr. Gilmer and smiled. Mr. Ewell seemed determined not to give the defense the time of day. Mr. Tate testified that her right eye was blackened, that she was beat on the... Oh, yeah, said the witness. I hold everything Tate said. You do? Said Atticus mildly. I just want to make sure. Then he went to the court reporter, said something, and the reporter entertained us for some minutes by reading Mr. Tate's testimony, as if it were stock market quotations. Which eye? Her left eye. Oh, yes, that'd make it her right eye. Mr. Finch, I remember now. She was banged. He flipped the page. Up on the right side of the face, Sheriff. Please repeat what you said. It was her right eye, I said. Thank you, Bert, said Atticus. You heard it again, Mr. Ewell. Do you have anything to add to it? Do you agree with the sheriff? I holds with Tate. Her eye was blackened and she was mighty beat up. The little man seemed to have forgotten his previous humiliation from the bench. It was becoming evident that he thought Atticus an easy match. Atticus is not an easy match. He seemed to grow ruddy again. His chest swelled, and once more he was a little red rooster. I thought he'd burst at his shirt with Atticus's next question. Mr. Ewell, can you read and write? Mr. Gilmer interrupted. Objection, he said. Can't see what the witness's literacy has to do with the case. Irrelevant and immaterial. Judge Taylor was about to speak, but Atticus said, Judge, if you'll allow me this question, plus one more, you'll all get an answer soon. Oh, you'll see. All right, let's see, said Judge Taylor. But make sure we see, Atticus. Overruled. Mr. Gilmer seemed as curious as the rest of us to what bearing the state of Mr. Yule's education had on the case. I'll repeat the question, said Atticus. Can you read and write? I most positively can, he answered. Will you read and write? Will you write your name here and show it to us? I most positively will. How do you think I sign my relief checks? Mr. Yule was endearing himself to his fellow citizens. The whispers and chuckles below us probably had to do with what a card he was. I was becoming nervous. Atticus seemed to know what he was doing, but it seemed to me that he'd gone frog sticking without a light. Never, 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 on cross-examination, ask a witness a question you don't already know the answer to, was the tenet or the rule I absorbed with my baby food. Do it and you'll often get an answer you don't want, an answer that might wreck your entire case. Atticus was reaching in the inside pocket of his coat. He drew out the envelope and reached into his vest pocket and unclipped his fountain pen. He moved leisurely and had turned so far that he was in full view of the jury. He unscrewed the fountain pen cap and placed it gently on the table, shook his pen a little, then handed it with an envelope to the witness. Would you write your name for us? He asked. Clearly now, so the jury can see that you wrote it. The jury can see you do it. Mr. Yule wrote on the back of the envelope and looked up complacently to see Judge Taylor staring at him as if he were some fragrant gardenia in full bloom on the witness stand. To see Mr. Gilmer half sitting, half standing at his table. The jury was watching him, with one man leaning forward with his hands over the heel railing. What's so interesting? He asked. You're left-handed, said Mr. Yule. You're left-handed, Mr. Yule, said Judge Taylor. Mr. Yule turned angry and to the judge. He said he didn't see what being left-handed had to do with it, that he was a Christ-fearing man and Atticus Finch was taking advantage of him. Tricky lawyers like Atticus Finch took advantage of him all the time with their tricking ways. He had told them what happened. He'd say it again and again, which he did. Nothing Atticus asked him after that shook his story. He looked through that window that ran the nigger off, then ran for sheriff. Atticus finally dismissed him. Mr. Gilmer asked him one more question. About your writing with your left hand. Are you ambidextrous, Mr. Yule? I most positively am not. I can use one hand as good as the other. Ambidextrous means use both hands, so he doesn't know what that word means. He added, glaring at the defense table. Jem seemed to be having quite a fit. He's laughing. He was pounding the balcony rail softly, and once he whispered, We've got him. I didn't think so. Atticus was trying to show, it seemed to me, that Mr. Yule could have beaten up Mayella. That much I could follow. If her right eye was blackened, she was beaten mostly on the right side of the face. She would tend to show that a left-handed person did it. Sherlock Holmes and Jem Finch would agree, but Tom Robinson could have easily been left-handed too. Like Mr. Hectate, I imagined the person facing me, went through a swift mental pantomime, and concluded that he might have held her hand with his right hand and pounded her with his left. I looked down at him. His back was to us, but I could see his broad shoulders and bulk, thick neck. He could have easily done it. I thought Jem was counting his chickens. So the end of chapter 17, we get two testimonies. We get Mayella's and we get Bob. No, we don't get Mayella's. We get Hectate's and Bob Ewell. So that is the end of 17. 18 is next. We see Mayella testify.